March 5, 1945, Schmidt, Germany. The cold wind of a dying German winter sweeps across the valleys west of the Rhine. Smoke hangs low, curling above villages reduced to blackened stone. The war is in its final act, yet danger still breathes beneath every footstep. Along a narrow forest road outside the ruined town, a U.S. engineer platoon moves cautiously. Their boots crunch through frost and shell fragments. Ahead, a dark mound of concrete, half buried in the hillside. The Germans called it a camp bunker. To the Americans, it looks like a tomb. An officer signals halt. The men advance slowly, cutting through rusted barbed wire. The door is sealed, scorched from artillery hits. But inside, when the torches flicker on, they find something unexpected. Intact radio sets, running water, food rations, maps, even an operational ventilation system. By nightfall, the same bunker once built to repel Americans becomes their new command post. Warmth replaces cold, light replaces darkness, and what was meant to defend Germany now directs its defeat. The story of how it happened began long before that cold March day. By early 1945, the war in Europe had entered its final, brutal stretch. The German Reich was collapsing, yet it refused to yield easily. Every mile of ground between the Allied lines and the Rhine River was fortified, mined, and defended with grim determination. It was here, in Western Germany, that American forces encountered one of the most formidable defensive systems ever built, the Siegfried Line, known to the Germans as the West Wall. Stretching over 390 miles from the Dutch border to the Swiss frontier, the Siegfried Line consisted of reinforced concrete bunkers, tank obstacles, minefields, and underground shelters. It had been planned in the late 1930s under Adolf Hitler's direct supervision, intended to mirror France's Maginot Line. But unlike the French fortifications, the German system was designed to be concealed. A network of pillboxes buried into hillsides, covered by trees and camouflage netting, almost invisible from the air. By late 1944, as the Allies broke through France and pushed eastward, these bunkers once again came alive. Inside them were German infantry, Volksgrenadiers, and young conscripts who believed the walls of concrete could slow down the unstoppable advance of the U.S. Army. For months, bitter fighting raged in the Hürtgen forest and around Aachen. Battles where visibility was poor, and every ridge concealed a fortified firing point. American troops learned quickly that charging these positions without proper coordination meant devastating losses. To overcome them, the U.S. relied on ingenuity more than brute force. Combat engineers became as crucial as riflemen. They devised methods to locate, breach, and neutralize bunkers under fire. They studied how each was built, the thickness of the walls, the position of firing slits, the layout of tunnels, until they could predict where to place explosives or flamethrowers for maximum effect. But what the Americans didn't expect was how useful these fortifications would become once captured. As the front lines shifted and German resistance fractured, the U.S. Army began discovering dozens of bunkers left behind in retreat. Some were destroyed. Many were abandoned intact, their steel doors sealed but their interiors untouched. What they found inside stunned them. Power generators, air filtration systems, even sleeping quarters equipped for months of occupation. These were not crude shelters. They were engineered strongholds, wired with precision and built to endure artillery barrages. By early March 1945, American divisions advancing through the Eifel region found that these captured bunkers offered something rare: solid protection against both enemy fire and the bitter late winter cold. More than just cover, they offered a ready-made infrastructure, communication lines, heating systems, and defensive layouts perfect for establishing field headquarters. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, always quick to adapt, realized the opportunity almost immediately. Instead of demolishing what the Germans had built, American units began repurposing them, transforming bunkers designed to resist invasion into command posts that directed it. This decision reflected a core principle of U.S. military efficiency: using what was available, turning enemy technology and engineering into tools of progress. Across the Western Front, this pattern repeated. In the hills near Aachen, engineers found storage bunkers large enough to serve as supply depots. In the Hürtgen forest, deep dugouts became temporary field hospitals. And in the Siegfried Line's forward positions, Small observation bunkers became artillery coordination centers. The adaptation was not only practical, it was symbolic. Concrete that once stood for Nazi defiance was now being used to secure Allied victory. Yet, this transformation didn't happen without danger. Every bunker held uncertainty: mines, traps, or lingering enemy soldiers. Before any could be used, engineers had to risk their lives clearing and testing them. And as the Rhine campaign began, this challenge grew even greater. Those first conversions in the Eifel region would soon set the standard for what was to come in the final drive toward the heart of Germany. By the time March arrived, the American advance was gathering unstoppable momentum. The Battle of the Bulge had ended in failure for Germany, and the once proud Wehrmacht was retreating on every front. Yet even in retreat, German defensive doctrine remained rigid. Commanders ordered small units to hold fortified bunkers as long as possible, buying time for reorganizing along the Rhine. In regions like the Eifel and the Hürtgen, that meant every hill and village hid a defensive nest. For American infantry, these fortifications became daily obstacles. Some occupied, others eerily empty. Each approach followed the same tense routine. Scouts moved forward, demolition teams stood ready, and engineers waited behind to clear, inspect, and, if possible, reclaim. It was the engineers who saw what others overlooked. They noticed that not all bunkers were destroyed or stripped. Many were still connected to underground cables and communication lines that led deep into the German network. Some bunkers, especially those near key crossroads, had working generators and heating systems that the Germans had built with remarkable precision. When American field commanders realized this, they began issuing orders that would change how the front operated. Instead of bypassing or demolishing captured bunkers, divisions were instructed to evaluate them for reuse. Every working radio set, every intact antenna, every field telephone became valuable. In February and March 1945, as part of Operation Lumberjack, U.S. forces under General Courtney Hodges' First Army pushed through western Germany toward the Rhine. Their task was simple but demanding: clear the region west of the river, secure bridgeheads, and prepare for the crossing. The terrain was punishing: dense forests, steep hills, and small towns packed with defenses. But unlike earlier in the war, the Americans were now fighting an enemy running out of everything: ammunition, fuel, and will. This collapse left behind hundreds of positions that had once been central to the West Wall. Some still contained classified maps and operational logs. Others were empty except for sleeping cots and half-eaten rations. It was in these deserted structures that U.S. engineers began their transformation work. The process was systematic. First came the inspection. Engineers entered cautiously, checking for mines, tripwires, and delayed charges. The Germans were known to booby-trap their fortifications. Once cleared, electricians and communication specialists moved in, restoring power using portable generators or linking to the existing circuits. Signal Corps teams rewired old German communication lines, connecting them to Allied networks. In a matter of hours, a once hostile bunker could be transmitting messages in English. The efficiency was remarkable. American logistics had already proven superior across Europe, from the Normandy beaches to the Red Ball Express. Now that same logistical discipline was being applied to captured enemy infrastructure. It wasn't simply about saving time. It was about exploiting every advantage. In towns like Schmidt, Nideggen, and Monshaw, these makeshift command posts became crucial coordination points. Inside their thick walls, intelligence officers planned artillery strikes, coordinated supply convoys, and tracked German troop movements. The bunker's defensive design offered safety from countershelling, allowing command to function even under heavy fire. To the Germans, the sight of their own fortifications flying American flags was more than a tactical loss. It was psychological. Propaganda had long boasted that the West Wall would protect the fatherland forever. Now, those same bunkers served as Allied headquarters, sheltering the very forces they were meant to destroy. Reports from captured German officers often mentioned disbelief. They couldn't understand how the Americans had managed to reactivate complex systems so quickly, in some cases within a single night. To them, this efficiency confirmed what had become increasingly obvious. the Allies' overwhelming industrial and technical superiority. By mid-March, American engineers had not only adapted these bunkers for command, but also integrated them into the wider logistics network supporting the Rhine crossings. Each converted strongpoint became a node in a massive operational web, proof that ingenuity, not just firepower, was driving the Allied advance. The stage was now set for the final push toward the Rhine, and for the moment when these fortified symbols of German endurance would be turned fully against their creators. Inside every captured bunker, the first thing soldiers noticed was the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed victory, it was the kind that came after something had collapsed. The air inside was heavy, stale, still carrying the faint smell of oil and damp uniforms. To the exhausted American infantrymen and engineers, that silence meant two things: safety and a moment's rest after months of relentless advance. The frontline troops who entered these fortifications were not just fighting men. They were builders, electricians, and mechanics in uniform. Many of them had grown up on farms or in factories, men used to fixing what was broken. In the ruined countryside of Western Germany, those skills became priceless. When a platoon found an intact bunker, it wasn't seen as an obstacle anymore. It was a gift, a chance to take cover from the cold, set up field radios, and bring order to the chaos of war. Tactically, the use of captured bunkers changed how the U.S. advanced through the Eifel and Rhineland regions. Instead of constructing new field headquarters under canvas or timber, American units began using these ready-made fortresses. A single German bunker could serve as a communication hub, observation post, and shelter all at once. The thick walls offered protection that no temporary structure could match. Combat engineers adapted quickly. They learned which bunkers were ideal for command, those located near crossroads or ridgelines, and which were better suited for supply or rest areas. They mapped them meticulously, assigning each a code and integrating it into the broader operational network. In just days, some captured sectors looked more organized than areas held for months. For the men inside, the difference was immediate. After weeks of sleeping in mud and freezing rain, the concrete walls offered warmth and a sense of permanence. The U.S. Army's quartermasters brought in stoves, cots, and rations. Power units were wired to the ventilation systems. Soon, these German-built bunkers echoed with the sound of American typewriters and radio chatter. Yet, for all their usefulness, they were never truly safe. Engineers were trained to approach each one with suspicion. A single tripwire or hidden charge could undo hours of work. Some bunkers had false walls concealing explosives. Others were rigged with delayed detonators that could go off days after occupation. Clearing teams worked methodically, often under immense pressure as fighting raged just miles away. The soldiers who took over these structures rarely thought about the men who built them, but the contrast was unmistakable. German doctrine emphasized rigidity and control. Each bunker was a fixed point meant to slow an enemy advance. The Americans, by contrast, turned them into fluid assets, used and abandoned as needed, constantly shifting forward. It reflected the difference between a defensive mindset and an adaptive one. In official reports, engineers described the conversions as routine field improvements. But to the men who lived through those days, it was more than routine. It was survival, efficiency, and even a strange form of irony, the enemy's pride becoming the Allies' shelter. By spring 1945, this approach was changing not just how the Americans fought, but how they thought about the terrain itself. Each captured bunker was no longer a relic of German strength. It was a building block in the architecture of Allied victory. The technical precision behind these transformations would soon reveal just how advanced U.S. engineering had become, and how quickly it could adapt to enemy design. What made these conversions so effective was not luck or chance. It was the systematic skill of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Signal Corps. American forces had spent years mastering the logistics of movement, repairing bridges, building airfields, laying pipelines. By 1945, they had become experts at adapting to any environment. The Siegfried Line's bunkers presented a new challenge, one that perfectly suited their ingenuity. Each bunker was a feat of German engineering. Walls of reinforced concrete up to 2 meters thick, sealed steel doors, and narrow firing slits made them nearly impervious to artillery. But what impressed American engineers most was the infrastructure hidden inside. filtered air systems, power generators, communication rooms, and intercom networks linking multiple outposts. For an army trained in efficiency, this was a ready-made framework waiting to be repurposed. Engineers approached the task with the precision of surgeons. Once a bunker was cleared and deemed safe, they began rewiring its internal systems. German electrical circuits ran on different voltage standards, so transformers were installed to accommodate American equipment. Signal Corps teams replaced the Wehrmacht's communication sets with SCR-299 and SCR-300 radio systems, the same portable units that had coordinated Allied operations from Normandy to the Ardennes. When field commanders first saw the results, they were astonished. In less than a day, what had been an enemy fortress became a fully functional Allied command post. The walls that once transmitted German orders to resist now carried American signals for advance. This transformation became a model of wartime adaptation: fast, efficient, and decisive. One of the great advantages of using German bunkers was their resilience against bombardment. Artillery could shake the walls but rarely break them. This allowed U.S. staff officers to plan under shellfire without disruption, something impossible in tents or temporary shelters. Inside, the temperature remained stable, the lights steady. Some bunkers even had running water, which engineers quickly connected to nearby streams or pumps. These improvements weren't isolated improvisations. They became part of the Allied doctrine of resource exploitation. Wherever the U.S. Army advanced, through Aachen, across the Hurtgen, and into the Rhine sector, the pattern repeated. Engineers scouted, inspected, and converted enemy structures into tools of command. Every hour saved on construction meant more time for planning operations. Every captured asset used meant fewer supplies needed from home. This technical mastery also underscored a deeper truth about the American war effort. Industrial and educational strength translated directly into battlefield flexibility. The U.S. had no shortage of men who understood engines, wiring, hydraulics, or architecture. Those civilian skills were now weaponized, turned into military capability. A mechanic from Detroit or a telephone engineer from New York could look at a captured generator or switchboard and make it work again, often within minutes. The Germans were stunned by this. Interrogation reports from captured officers reveal their disbelief. They had been told that Allied troops relied on brute force and endless resources, not on technical sophistication. To see their carefully built defensive network turned into a functioning Allied headquarters overnight shattered that illusion. By converting bunkers instead of destroying them, American forces demonstrated a kind of quiet dominance, the ability to take the enemy's strongest points and make them their own. It wasn't just about physical structures. It was about mastery of knowledge, of systems, of adaptability under pressure. That mastery would soon play its most critical role during the crossing of the Rhine, the moment when every ounce of engineering skill and logistical power came together to end the war in Europe. By mid-March 1945, the American advance had reached the threshold of Germany's heartland. The Siegfried Line had been breached, and the last defensive bastions west of the Rhine were collapsing. Yet despite the momentum, every forward step required coordination, the kind of coordination that only the U.S. Army's network of converted command bunkers could provide. Operation Lumberjack began officially on March 1, 1945. Its objective: capture Cologne and clear the western bank of the Rhine. The First and Third Armies advanced across the Eifel region, pushing through towns reduced to rubble and forests still seeded with mines. For every division, the biggest challenge was communication. Roads were cratered, bridges destroyed, and radio signals unstable in the rough terrain. That's where the bunkers became essential. From inside their captured German fortifications, engineers and staff officers managed to build a connected chain of command posts stretching across dozens of miles. A former Wehrmacht command bunker near Nedegen served as a relay hub for the 7 Corps, while another near Heimbach coordinated the movements of the 9th Armored Division. Thick walls muffled the distant rumble of artillery, but inside the rooms, typewriters clacked, telephones rang, and field maps spread across tables marked every position in colored pencil. The transformation was so fast it bordered on surreal. In some sectors, American units occupied a German bunker in the morning, cleared it by noon, and were transmitting from it by evening. What had taken Germany years to construct was now being absorbed into Allied operations in less than 24 hours. It was during these days that the famous Remagen Bridge incident unfolded. On March 7, 1945, elements of the 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, the only intact bridge across the Rhine. Within hours, engineers and radio operators in repurposed bunkers were coordinating reinforcements and supply convoys toward the crossing. Messages that once flowed through German circuits now directed the largest river assault in the Western campaign. American commanders recognized the irony. The very infrastructure meant to keep invaders out was now enabling their advance. In situation reports, the tone was professional, almost understated, but between the lines was quiet satisfaction. The engineers' work had given the Allied armies a logistical and tactical rhythm that Germany could no longer match. Even the enemy noticed. A captured German officer, interrogated near Bonn, admitted his shock at how efficiently the Americans had turned the West Wall against its own masters. He described seeing U.S. troops operating from bunkers his men had built, with radios working, maps pinned, and coffee boiling. For him, it was the moment he realized the war was lost. As Operation Lumberjack concluded, the results were undeniable. Within 10 days, American forces had reached the Rhine along a 75-mile front. The enemy's defensive grid, once a symbol of Nazi engineering pride, had been stripped of its purpose and woven into the Allied command structure. The crossing of the Rhine was no longer a question of if, but how soon. And when it came, the converted bunkers would once again serve as the nerve centers for one of the most complex river crossings in modern warfare. From the hills of the Eifel to the riverbanks at Remagen, American engineering had turned Germany's walls of resistance into corridors of victory. The first American soldiers who entered those German bunkers expected ruins, traps, explosives, or corpses. What they found instead were testaments to engineering obsession. Reinforced doors sealed tight with pressure locks. Air filtration systems powered by hand-cranked ventilators. Underground power rooms, fuel drums neatly labeled, and rows of cots that hadn't been slept in since retreat orders came down. Everything spoke of a force that had once prepared to fight a war to the last breath, only to abandon its walls in haste. The U.S. Army engineers wasted no time. They pried open blast doors, cleared debris, and ran telephone lines through corridors once filled with German commands. Within hours, signal operators from the 4th and 9th Infantry Divisions were tuning field radios inside the same concrete rooms once used by Wehrmacht communications officers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. One report from the 276th Engineer Combat Battalion describes the process in almost clinical detail. Bunker secured at 1,400 hours. German equipment intact. Rewired generator for American frequency use. Established local switchboard. Functioning as battalion command post by 1900. The transition was swift, efficient, and symbolic. In every bunker turned American, there was a quiet understanding among the men. This was more than tactical recycling. It was the physical proof that the tide had fully turned. Some of the larger bunkers, especially those near the Rhine crossings, became central command nodes. The complex near Erfdam, originally part of the Siegfried Line's Schmidt defense zone, was converted into a temporary headquarters for artillery coordination. Here, maps were redrawn daily. Generators hummed through the night as field telephones buzzed with orders to battery positions miles away. Officers who'd been operating from tents and farmhouses now worked behind concrete walls, shielded from shellfire. Outside, the air still carried the sound of sporadic fighting, the distant staccato of machine guns, the low thud of mortars. But inside, the rhythm was different. The tapping of typewriters, the rasp of boots on concrete, the steady click of Morse code. War had moved underground, not in secrecy, but in precision. For many soldiers, these bunkers offered their first real sense of safety since Normandy. One engineer later recalled in a letter home, "After months of mud and cold, we finally had a roof that could take a hit. The Germans built them to survive bombardment, and now they're keeping us alive." Feels strange, like sleeping inside the enemy's skin. There were darker discoveries too. Some bunkers revealed signs of last stands. Bullet holes on the walls, spent shells scattered near doorways, and graffiti written in chalk. "Wir halten bis zum letzten Mann." We hold until the last man. Others were half flooded, the retreating Germans having sabotaged pumps or open valves to make them unusable. Still, the Americans restored most within days. The real triumph, however, was strategic. These underground positions became reliable command and logistics hubs in the most unstable days of March 1945. They coordinated artillery barrages, air support calls, and resupply routes under fire. In a war often defined by mobility, these immovable structures gave stability, the kind of anchor that allowed the Allied advance to stay synchronized even as front lines shifted daily. By the time U.S. forces prepared to cross the Rhine in full strength, hundreds of miles of former German bunkers, tunnels, and storage depots were functioning under new command. Concrete built to resist invasion was now the backbone of invasion itself. It was an inversion so complete that some soldiers joked about leaving plaques on the bunker walls reading, "Constructed by Germany, reclaimed by the United States, March 1945. By late March 1945, the Rhine was no longer just a geographical barrier. It had become a line between the past and the inevitable. Every mile west of it was littered with remnants of the Siegfried Line, the once mighty West Wall that Hitler had promised would hold forever. Instead, it became a skeleton of its former purpose, inhabited not by the Wehrmacht, but by the U.S. Army's engineers, radio men, and staff officers. Each captured bunker carried its own story. Some became artillery control stations. Others were converted into medical posts, map rooms, or ammunition depots. The Germans had designed them to withstand direct 155mm hits, and that strength now served the Allies perfectly. Concrete that had been poured to resist them was now protecting them. The transformation happened so rapidly it bordered on the surreal. Reports from the 9th Army's engineer units described entire networks of bunkers along the Rohr and Erft rivers being connected with field telephones and cable lines within days. The bunker's internal wiring, designed for the Wehrmacht's communication systems, often required only minor adjustments. What once relayed German defensive orders now carried American attack coordinates. In the bunker near Schmidt, the same one first discovered in early March, U.S. forces established a temporary forward headquarters for coordinating artillery against German positions east of the Call Trail. Engineers rewired its generator to American voltage, repurposed its bunk beds into storage, and marked the walls with new signs. HQ, 47th Infantry. Outside, snowmelt turned the roads into rivers of mud, but inside, the concrete corridors buzzed with life. It wasn't just practicality that drove this conversion, it was necessity. The final push into the heart of Germany required fast coordination and secure command. Field tents couldn't offer that. Airfields, bridges, and depots were under constant threat from Luftwaffe raids and countershelling. But the bunkers stood immovable. They offered protection not just from the enemy, but from chaos itself. A U.S. Army Signal Corps report from April 1945 summarized it simply: captured enemy fortifications have proven invaluable. Their design integrity and supply systems make them ideal for occupation. Enemy strongpoints are now serving the Allied advance. The irony was not lost on the men using them. These fortresses, once symbols of German permanence, had become monuments to its collapse. Each radio transmission sent from inside those thick walls was, in a sense, another signal of reversal. The concrete once meant to repel invasion now pulsed with orders driving it forward. By early April, hundreds of bunkers were active under Allied control across Western Germany. The larger ones housed intelligence officers decoding intercepted communications. Others stored ammunition or served as rest stations for exhausted troops cycling out from the front. Even the smallest pillboxes found new life as radio outposts or medical shelters. For locals who returned to their shattered towns, the sight of American flags over the same bunkers that had once terrified them was disorienting. In villages like Kahl and Wassenack, residents saw familiar gray domes of concrete now echoing with English voices and the rhythmic tapping of Morse code. The enemy's fortresses had changed owners overnight, and with them, the feeling of the land itself shifted. Still, not all bunkers were adopted. Some were too damaged, flooded, or booby-trapped to be useful. Engineers often blasted open sealed chambers, uncovering ammunition dumps, fuel stores, or in some cases, the remains of defenders who never escaped. But most of what remained was turned toward the fight ahead, a network of silent strongholds that now carried the hum of Allied machinery. And as the Rhine crossings began, those same bunkers played a quiet but decisive role, guiding the greatest river assault of the Western Front. The seizure and repurposing of Germany's defensive bunkers became one of the quiet success stories of the final campaign in Europe. By April 1945, as the Allies broke through the Ruhr pocket, reports from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers confirmed that more than 1,200 German fortifications, from small observation posts to massive regional command centers, were now in operational Allied use. What began as battlefield improvisation had turned into a deliberate strategy. The American Army, renowned for its logistical flexibility, turned the enemy's fortifications into infrastructure for victory. Engineers mapped out entire sections of the Siegfried Line, cataloging bunker types, wall thicknesses, and air systems. They learned to identify models by sight. Type 10 for personnel, Type 19 for communication, Type 24 for artillery control. Each was stripped of its insignia, scrubbed of soot and grime, and assigned a new purpose under U.S. command. One Signal Corps captain later recalled, "It was as if we'd been handed fully built strongholds. All we had to do was change the locks. The Germans had built the West Wall to last 1,000 years. Instead, it served their enemies for the last 100 days of the war." Inside these bunkers, U.S. soldiers found a window into how their enemy had lived and fought. The air filtration systems were sophisticated, the communications panels meticulously wired. There were remnants of German rations, crates of Erbswurst pea soup, bottles of ersatz coffee, and propaganda leaflets warning civilians of the Allied advance. Some bunkers had hand-painted murals on their concrete walls, eagles, swastikas, or names of garrisons that no longer existed. But what struck most soldiers wasn't fear or hatred, it was curiosity. They were walking through the architecture of a defeated idea. The precision, the planning, the immense resources, all of it now repurposed with American efficiency. What the Germans had buried deep into the hills to keep the world out had, in the end, become the Allies' foothold to break in. In regions like Hürtgen and the Eifel, where months of bitter fighting had reduced forests to splintered ruins, the bunkers became rare islands of safety. Artillery officers used them as observation platforms to guide fire missions into the Ruhr. Combat engineers set up repair depots in their cool interiors, welding tank treads by the glow of acetylene lamps. Medics treated the wounded in rooms once reserved for officers of the Wehrmacht. There was a quiet satisfaction in this reversal. To occupy an enemy's fortress and make it your own was the most symbolic kind of victory, not one of destruction, but of adaptation. When the fighting finally moved east beyond the Rhine, many of these repurposed bunkers remained in use for months. They became rest centers, ration points, or storage depots during the occupation period. A few were handed over to the German civilian administration after the surrender. Others were sealed, abandoned under overgrown grass and moss, their thick doors rusting shut once again. Yet their legacy endured. The U.S. Army's post-war engineering manual cited lessons learned from the West Wall, how to breach, occupy, and rewire enemy fortifications with minimal effort. Future Cold War designs for European defensive networks quietly borrowed from both the German precision and the American improvisation of 1945. Those bunkers still stand today, scattered across Western Germany. Some are museums. Others lie hidden beneath farmland. The marks of both nations remain, the carved German serial numbers, and beside them, the faded stenciled letters, US HQ. What began as instruments of German defiance ended as monuments to American ingenuity, proof that victory isn't only won by breaking through, but by knowing how to use what lies within. The story of America's engineers turning German bunkers into command posts is more than a tale of tactical success. It's a study in adaptability. These fortresses, built to preserve a regime, ended up serving the army that destroyed it. Concrete became neutral, stripped of ideology, and turned into a tool of progress. Every switch flipped and cable rewired inside those bunkers symbolized the larger truth of 1945. Germany's meticulous engineering had made a nation even more skilled at turning plans into power. The Americans didn't just capture ground, they absorbed what worked and made it their own. For the soldiers who fought through the forests and towns of Western Germany, those dark underground rooms came to represent something deeply human. Where once there was fear, there was now function. Where once there was defense, there was command. It was the perfect metaphor for the end of the war, taking the remains of destruction and shaping them into something that could move the world forward. Today, when visitors step inside one of those preserved bunkers, they see two histories layered together: the precision of German design and the unmistakable mark of American improvisation. One tried to hold the world still, the other pushed it toward victory, and in that quiet, concrete silence you can still feel both,